What do you think are the main things that make artists and athletes similar?
We crave impossible things. We crave championships we'll never achieve and works of art that can't possibly be done. We don't set reasonable goals.
I'm Heather Grzych, and this is the Wisdom of the Body podcast. This podcast explores the idea of body intelligence as the real key to learning the knowledge of life, or what we call Ayurveda in the ancient language of Sanskrit. We do that by connecting with today's creative leaders and experts who will help you listen to your body, trust your gut, and live in deeper harmony with nature. Come join me as we unlock the golden door to clear, direct perception and become very deep listeners. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can also follow us by joining my email at heathergrzych.com or on Instagram at heathergrzych. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. Today I'm here with Mary Volmer. She is the author of 2 novels, Reliance, Illinois, and Crown of Dust, and is the Mission Fellow for Athletics at St. Mary's College in California. And this is an interfaith lay chaplaincy position where she counsels and attends to the spiritual well-being of NCAA D1 athletes and coaches. She specializes in meditation, deep listening, and centering prayer techniques, and teaches athletes and coaches to manage and alleviate anxiety, rediscover joy, and develop their gifts in a balanced and healthy way. In private practice, Mary works with artists, especially writers. She uses talk story to help artists discover the voice and underlying emotional and dramatic structure of their work. As a former D1 women's basketball player and a working novelist, Mary shares unique insights into the emotional and spiritual challenges experienced by athletes and artists. Mary, thank you so much for being here today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, today, Mary and I are going to talk about artists and athletes and spirituality, which on the surface, some people might not see as connected, but you're going to show us how they are connected today, right?
Oh, I hope so.
You know, it's always like in the healing world, there's always these debates about, the disconnect between science and spirituality and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh, yeah, well, we're going to do athletics and spirituality and really blow your mind. I also find it so perfect that we're talking about spirituality and your name is.
Yes, I had a very Catholic great-great-grandmother who was one of many Marys, as am I.
That's great. Well, this is bound to be a good conversation because my last name apparently means sin. So Mary and the
That's
sinner.
perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to start with the stupid question here, or maybe it's more of a heathen question I'm supposed to ask. So I was raised Catholic and I'm not Catholic anymore. I sort of cut ties with the church when I was like 14. So I'm a bit out of touch with what happens in the Catholic Church. And I just have to ask you, what exactly is a mission fellow and why would you need one for sports?
So a mission fellow is a lay chaplain at the college. Now, we kind of invented the position. For years, it had been a Catholic nun or a brother. Sister Dolores was my predecessor and also Brother Brady, but nobody wanted the position. And I had been working with artists and their spiritual health of artists for years prior to this with Orinda Community Church just down the road, and jumped at the opportunity to work with athletes. Now, I'm not Catholic, and my Christianity would curl the eyelashes of my very Lutheran grandfather. So I had been exploring the wisdom practices and the spiritual practices of a variety of different traditional religions and non-traditional to help my artists. And so, having been an athlete first, I recognized completely the overlap between the kinds of preparation, the devotion and sacrifice, the desire for a kind of transcendence that I sought both as an athlete and as an artist. And so carrying that over to the athletics wasn't a stretch. They named it Mission Fellow because I'm not a brother or a nun. I don't have a clerical degree. I have 2 master's degrees in something completely different. And so my expertise, while it has been years in the making, had no formal title aligned to it. And so we made one up, to be perfectly honest with you. And the Mission Fellow's job is threefold. One is to do pastoral care on spiritual direction. So that's just counseling. Student athletes are strong, right? That's our perception of them, strong and able and organized. And yet they're 18, 19, first time away from their moms and their families. They're growing into their bodies still, they're growing into their minds. And this image of strength really wears on them, especially my young men. So they can come and talk to me about things they can't talk to their coach about. They can come talk to me about things they wouldn't talk to their roommate about, or their girlfriend, or boyfriend, or teammate. That's part of it. That's just giving them a place to be vulnerable. And the second part is I teach mission formation. So St. Mary's is a Lasallian Catholic school. And I'm not Catholic, but I'm very much Lasallian. De La Salle was the patron saint of teachers, and I'm from a long family line of teachers. So I related to that. So I teach our student athletes just our history. Where is it that we come from, and how do we approach education? And one of the key proponents of the De La Salle mission is that, salvation is in every epiphany every day. It's not something far off. It's something that's accessible and should be desired at any given moment in a classroom or in a court. And then the other part is more working with teams and athletes. So I'll go into the volleyball team, for example, and we'll talk about how to arrive at a match. What do you do? How do you prepare yourself, not physically necessarily, not mentally necessarily, but spiritually to arrive at a match? As an athlete of years and years, 16 years, I prepared my body. To some extent, I prepared my mind. But it wasn't until after my athletic career was over that I realized the missing component was my spiritual preparation, which was really a way of embodying the moment that allowed me to exist without anxiety within it and to find joy in the process rather than the pressure of having to perform at a very high level. So I think I'm not sure I answered the question directly. I certainly didn't answer.
Yeah, you did. You did. And you're just making me think of I just saw Inside Out 2. Have you
I
seen it
haven't
yet?
seen that yet. No.
Oh, I just saw it and I know you have a little one too. My son's 7. I think it was a little over his head because it's dealing with like emotions that I don't think kids really experience a lot until they're maybe prepubescent or pubescent. So it was like, but the girl, the main character, she's a female hockey player. I think she's in middle school going into high school and stuff. And just you get inside her head in the sport. So I think you might like it for that reason. And, I had some experience playing sports as well. And I'm curious, like, I guess I'm an artist too because I write books, but so I relate to a lot of what you're saying. But I'm wondering if you were to say specifically about sports, what percent of sports do you think is physical versus mental? Do you think it's success in sports? Do you think it's more physical or more mental? And how would you give that spread, those percentages?
It's a hard question. It depends on what the level you're playing at. It depends on what you want. It depends on the sport. Is chess a sport? Is golf? There's so many different ways in which human beings compete. Almost everything you see has been made into a competition. And ask what the definition of sport is. Does it have to be a physical act? Is it mired in competition first and foremost? At the highest level, most athletes will tell you that the line between physical superiority is so thin at that level that it really is the mental and the spiritual gifts that come in and allow someone to be successful. Now, what is successful? Is the championship successful? Is playing at your peak ability, even if you don't win the match or the race, or is that successful? And that's some of the things that we question. We question these definitions of success that have been ground into young people, and certainly my generation as well. That is a very limited definition. So the athletes I know who found a lifetime, not just of success, but of joy and fulfillment through what they were doing physically, have a balance of a mental and very often a spiritual practice. Buddhism is one that comes to mind, that a lot of student athletes, I use it with a lot of student athletes, Zen meditations and different kinds of meditations, because it allows them to experience spiritual rest, I guess, and openness and spaciousness without having to define it in a particular way that some religions demand. I had to come to terms with that as an athlete. I played Division I basketball. There's a very small percentage of people who can say that, and very small percentage who said they paid their way through college playing basketball. But I was also scrub on the bench for 4 years. I never started a game. And my intention every year was to start. I wanted to start. I wanted to play. And it wasn't until my senior year when I realized, honey, this isn't happening for you. And it's not for lack of effort. And it's not for lack of anything that you could have done physically. Now, there's still a question in my mind, if had I prepared spiritually and mentally as much as I had prepared physically, would I have had a place on the court? Maybe. But what I discovered in that senior year was a role as a spiritual and a mental leader that transcended anything I could have done on the court. So my career, though you will not find me in any of the record books, I consider it a success. My team was tremendously successful, one of the most successful teams in the college history in terms of women's sports. So the sacrifice of my own ambition, as I had perceived it going into college, allowed, I think, for all of us, not just for me, to achieve something larger than we could have accomplished if someone like me, a scrub on the bench, said, well, screw you. I'm just going to half-ass it at practice because I'm not going to get a place on the court anyway. My mentality was, if I'm going to be on this bench, this is going to be the best damn team in the league. I'm going to challenge you every day. You're going to earn your spot every day. And I'm going to help you. I'm going to help us gain a mastery over this thing that we couldn't have done alone. And I was surrounded by tall, beautiful, athletic bodies. 6'4" twins, the Dosti twins, two of my good friends. They'll probably tell you I made them work harder than they ever would have worked on their own, because that was my role. That was my success, not what I had originally envisioned. And I think you'll come across many, many athletes who, having achieved the pinnacle of their sport, still feel empty, unsuccessful. I don't know what it is, depressed in some cases. I've met quite a few who have gone through that crucible and on the other side found something more. But so those measures of success in athletics, like art, are not obvious. Most athletes will not close their career on a win. Losing is a daily practice if you're an athlete. You're not going to get your personal best. You're going to feel like crap, and you're still going to do it in the morning. You're still going to show up to the gym. So those notions of transcendent moments, of spectacular Disney moments, when, most of us don't have those. So we have to seek small, subtle, more consistent ways of finding fulfillment within that.
Yeah. Whether it's then or now, do you see a lot of athletes struggle?
Oh, yeah. Anyone who makes it to this level has been the best athlete on their team their whole lives. They have been on the elite teams. They have done all the camps. They've probably had trainers in some cases. And so when you go from that to sitting on the bench on a team, and not only that, but being away from home for the first time in your life, and not only that, but having to do your own laundry and maybe failing your first essay test, and maybe, all of these firsts pile up, and allowing them to see themselves with a wider lens. You are not just an athlete. There's all this potential within you, all of these areas of growth that now demand your attention. That can be very, very scary and very, very exciting. And at each step in the athletic process, if you could consider it 4 years, each year has its own transition state and its own questions. Whether or not you're going to play professional sports after college, and most don't, the question of what's next is real and pressing, and can cause stress if you don't approach it with a little bit more gratitude and joy than I think we're taught to in this culture.
Again, you got to see inside out
I
too. But
will
I'm not gonna tell you why. I'm not gonna tell you why, because I know when you see these moments, you're gonna be like, "Oh, that's why Heather was." So, do you think, regardless of what the players are experiencing, right, the athletes, do you think sports are spiritual for everybody? This, I guess, for the
It
spectators.
can definitely be. You know, if you've been in the arena in a big game and the throbbing sound of the voices in motion together, if you've ever been to a Manchester United game or one of those big stadiums and thousands of voices are singing in unison and the ground seems to be moving beneath you, there is that sensation of transcendence there. My husband and I travel in Europe. We always see churches and we go to stadiums, like the two sacred places in our lives, I think. And there is the sense of community and belonging that goes along with rooting for and supporting a team in winning and losing. You know, the shared agony and the shared euphoria is real. And there are, of course, really negative mob mentality versions of this. And those are the ones that make the news, you know, in Boston, if whether they win or lose a championship, we're going to smash up the neighborhood. But on a smaller level, all over the world, there is this sense of belonging and camaraderie and shared purpose, whether you're on the pitch or not.
Yeah, I think I read some stuff about fMRI studies where when people look at like the logo of their favorite sports team or like their religion or their favorite brand, that we have similar feelings toward those types of things that feel bigger than us, where we feel,
Yeah,
yeah.
part of something bigger than yourself, part of something, this, the myth of individualism, like we are only this one being. Yeah, I wrote a book called Reliance, Illinois, which is a novel, but the word reliance was in response to self reliance, this myth that we are completely self reliant. And of course, I'm simplifying completely what the essay had to say, but not the ethos that it represented, that we are actually completely reliant and interdependent. And there are moments when we feel this. And one of those moments in cultures across the world are sporting events, a common purpose, a common identity. I mean, look at the basketball court. There's two idols on either side. You've got the pews circling above. I mean, even the arrangement of an athletic arena suggests its sacred nature, which is not to say it can't be corrupt, as all things can.
Yeah, I love that. And since you brought up basketball and you're a D1 basketball player, I had mentioned to you that I don't watch a lot of sports, but I did just watch the Celtics NBA finals. I watched it because Joe Mazzulla's dad, Dan Mazzulla, was my basketball coach in high school and had a huge impact on my life. He was also like my boss at my summer job and stuff like that. And I remember Joe as a child, and so the last time I saw him, I was in high school and he was a little boy, like starting, stuff and mouthing off at our basketball practices,
Yeah,
right? And that was the last time I saw him because, like, I left home to go to college at 18 and then moved away to California. We're both from this very small town in Rhode Island, and, no one sort of like makes it out, but, we're two of the people that made it out. And so I became fascinated watching him as the man he is now, as the coach of this team, and fascinated in so many ways. And, became fascinated by the way he brought in his religion, actually, because it's a huge part of his life. Everybody in my hometown was Catholics, a lot of like Italians, like he's half Italian, and Italians are very Catholic. So it's such a huge part of his life. And I saw that he had like the floor of the old Boston Garden made into a rosary. Someone gave it to him as a gift. And so he would talk about spirituality and like just ritual and discipline. He would walk. This I learned from, like, I became sort of obsessed with him for like a week after the NBA finals and going, how did he get this way? He would walk with his Celtics rosary beads around the court. He would have these rituals in this space, like in this church, in this temple, like you're talking about. before the games, making it like a sacred space.
Yeah, and the role of ritual in sport is very, very strong. Ask any baseball player. Watch anybody coming to bat. Watch anybody at a free throw line or taking a penalty kick. And I think, from my perspective, it's dangerous to mistake the vehicle for the thing itself. Like for me, art and sport is a vehicle of transcendence. It is not itself the divine, it is not itself the thing to be sought. It's a way of moving through your own limitations so that you can experience something more, that togetherness of relationship with another person or transcending your own limitations. And maybe that is what he does. I don't know. I think it's really interesting. Our coach at St. Mary's is very, very quiet about his faith. But if you go into the chapel and any one time in the morning, you're going to see this man over in the left side of the chapel sitting down. It's probably going to be Randy. And Randy doesn't talk about it and he doesn't pontificate, but he's there every day. And it's an important part of his life. He's not very extravagant about it. I don't think he has anything. I don't think he's Catholic. I actually don't know. He's that private about it. That's amazing to have a rosary beads made out of the floor of the last Boston garden. That's what he did.
I guess someone gave it to him. Yeah, he has been very vocal, about
And
the
the
role
Catholic
of his.
Church for a long time that has a history of harnessing athletics as a mode of teaching spiritual lessons. The Jesuits knew for a long time their school grounds had athletic facilities built into them. They recognized that actually the balance between mental growth, physical growth, and spiritual growth was necessary to any young person growing up. The Lasallians understood the same thing, that it was the combination of these areas that created a whole person, not one to the exclusion of the other. When you look at 19th century America and the craze for muscular Christianity, which rose when a lot of the agrarian people who were working on farms, that agrarian lifestyle, moved towards the cities. And everybody was terrified that what's going to happen to our boys and our men, where they're going to be incapable of physical exertion. So what happens? You have the rise of sport, you have the rise of gyms. The German contribution to this, and I'm probably going to misspell the word, but Turnvereins, the gyms that they brought over from Germany and planted all the way through the Midwest. You can still see them throughout, where you would rigorously train the body because that was part of becoming a virtuous and whole person. And the YMCAs throughout, too, are still a thing in the United States and still very visible. Religions have long understood the connection between sport and spirituality. If you go all the way back to the Greeks and you look at the games that they played in Homer's The Odyssey or in the Aeneid in Virgil's version, there's always some sort of games, physical activity that are also quite ritualistic and connected in a meaningful way, both to the goal at hand, but also to the gods.
Wow, that's so cool. I watched this video of Nelson Mandela talking about how sport has the power to unify people more than anything else available.
Sport at the Service of Humanity is an organization that was founded, I think, in the Vatican in 2016, but it's not Catholic. It's not supposed to be limited just to Catholicism. And it asks people to live like you play. And that's kind of the motto of the whole thing. Well, to do that, you have to really consider how you're playing. If you're going to spend effort and time and money devoted to this thing, how might you learn to live your life in the same kind of clarity? They have conferences each year, and each year they ask us, well, what are you doing on the university level? And it's just now becoming a subject people are studying. One of the most interesting writers, I think, on this now is Father Patrick Kelly out of Detroit Mercy, who uses a lot of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's research on flow, which is flow. Flow is something that I think transcends any kind of spiritual discussion. Just complete and utter engagement with a clean goal and a clear focus and that sense of lost time and this balance between the challenge you're facing and your ability to face it. And within that, you lose, as an artist or a writer, you probably lost all sense of time because you're completely engaged in a moment. And that too is part of the spiritual and the artistic endeavor that Father Patrick Kelly writes beautifully about from a Catholic perspective.
Yeah, it reminds me of like the states of meditation in the yogic tradition, like dharana, the concentration, and dhyana, which is kind of like the same as chan or zen, that beginner's mind kind of place. And then that ultimate union or yoking to something where you surrender.
That surrender is how do you at once put all your effort towards something and surrender it at the same time? It doesn't seem logical or possible, but it is that moment of surrender to that creates joy. You let go all that you hoped and planned and allow what to happen, what will happen. And then the game starts to come to you. You hear players speak about the game slowing down, and their ability to respond seems to happen almost in a trance like state. Now, you don't achieve that every time you play, certainly not every time you practice. But like the Buddhists say, you cut wood and carry water day after day for those moments when that activity leads to something greater.
Okay, so what do you think are the main things that make artists and athletes similar?
We crave impossible things. We crave championships we'll never achieve and works of art that can't possibly be done. We don't set reasonable goals, but there's something inside of us that whispers to the gifts we've been given and says, develop this, use this, share this. And from an athlete's perspective, you share it by competing, by playing. And from an artist's perspective, you share it by creating a work of art that speaks to and with other people, whether that's a book or a painting or whatever it is. There are physical gifts that I think artists use on a daily basis. I know that when I'm writing well, it feels very physical. The imaginative quality is if I feel I'm sweating, I'm responding emotionally, and it feels very much the same on the court. I don't know. I think I know quite a few artists, including Natalie Diaz, who played for, who did she play for? Yeah, she was a D1 player as well. She's a native woman who just won the Pulitzer Prize in poetry. And she writes a lot about spirituality and sport and her relationship to her body and her relationship to her craft. And I think you just have to experience one or the other to know and feel that transcendent feeling once, and then you crave it again and again.
You're sort of, I don't know why, for some reason, like this stereotype of athletes being like dumb jocks just came up in my mind. And I'm like wondering, why do you think athletes have been given that stereotype as being dumb jocks?
Some don't develop their other skills. So that is true. Some think that they only need to develop one part of themselves and have done. I've never met a Division One basketball player, boy, young man, who doesn't think they're going to the NBA. I mean, that's just, they have this perception of themselves. But it's just not true. There's so many different kinds of intelligences out there. And when you teach an athlete who is a gifted athlete, you show them something in yoga or a dance step or an athletic move, and they'll get it. They will get it in half the time, a fraction of the time that someone less gifted might. And that's a form of intelligence. That's a form of deep, physical, embodied intelligence that we don't give them credit for. When you listen to podcasts of athletes talking about their craft and how deeply they've analyzed each aspect of the form of their shot and the physiology that goes into that and their nutrition and their approach emotionally, they are students. They're often not students, though, of what is recognized as intelligence.
And it's a lot of discipline and time that goes into building a craft like that. The difference, I guess, with a lot of art, not all art, but is you are also dealing with like other types of information. And then you can like learn information or about people or something outside of just that sport, probably as you're going through the process. Like if you do research, but I mean, you can learn by researching, things for a game too. It's just, there's a little bit more of an opportunity to broaden your mind, I think, with art.
Jackson wrote a book called Sacred Hoops that looks at spirituality in sport. Thomas Sherry is a poet and a writer. There are these seasons in our lives that we dedicate completely to one endeavor. Motherhood is one of them. And I can't say that I've stopped all their endeavors to be a mother, but it really is consuming. And it is a season of my life that I learn and engage with joyfully and sometimes dutifully. An athlete's season of play is short. There's this whole life outside of that season. And most athletes live just fine outside of it and develop their gifts. But that complete engagement is part of the spiritual endeavor. It's almost monkish the way that a lot of athletes, especially at the D1 and professional level, approach because they have to. As a Division One athlete, I would be on the court or in the training room or in the weight room 5, 6 hours a day, and that was off season. During season, even more. You add to that being in the classroom and trying to get your homework done, and there's a very narrow focus that goes into that. And it can be crushing when you're not getting the result that you want.
Right. Yeah, as you experienced in college
Yeah,
and
unless you open yourself to other kinds of growth within that experience. I'm not going
yeah.
to lie, there are some athletes who don't care all about their academics. They're just there to play ball, and the school gave them a chance. But the majority, in fact, in our university, I think the average GPA is something like 3.5 something for Division One athletes. That's way over what the casual student has. And it's because they understand discipline. They know how to use time. And they also know how to engage deeply with something. They know how to, nobody wants to do sprints. They do it. They know how to do unpleasant things that are pushing them in a direction they want to go. And that's a great skill to have, to know how to push through things that are serving you but are unpleasant.
I mean, it's also kind of interesting that we judge certain things as better. When I look at, I'm very involved in my kids' school, and, there's certain groups of kids that historically are testing lower on tests and things like that. And, yeah, I mean, different interventions for that for sure. But at the same time, I sit there and I wonder, like, is there some other gift this child is going to have that may not be the test? Not to say that I don't want everybody to do well on a test, but I'm also like, is there a reason that this child is actually needed for this other, maybe even more important job?
I coach AAU basketball, and there's many different levels, amateur athletic union basketball. And I've got boys who are tremendous athletes, even at a very young age. And I've got young men who may have some ability but have never dribbled a ball before in their lives. So you've got all of these stages of development on the same court. And I have as much fun with the young man who's never dribbled and walked at the same time as with the kid who's dribbling between his legs and doing all these fancy things on his way to the basket, because the growth is where the joy is. It doesn't matter to me as a coach where you are. I'm glad you're here. Let's go from there and go somewhere. And that the joy of those small gains, I don't care if it's music or basketball or whatever it is a spiritual joy. Growth in any direction, especially with the arts and in athletics, which harms most of the time nobody.
I help coach my son's baseball team, and
Baseball.
yeah, he's little league, and I tried not to coach, but then I kept showing up, and then they were like, "Heather, you need to go get fingerprinted. You're a coach."
Yeah.
I couldn't not coach. I mean, I played, in high school, and I didn't play in college because I was in theater and it took too much time. But my son went to this baseball camp, and it was held by this kind of old school guy. He's got some years under his belt. He's the inventor of this like practice bat called the Easton Thunder Stick. It's just like a big long stick. So it's not like a full bat, and you just have to hit this very narrow little bat thing. Anyway, but he's super old school. And at the end of every practice, he would sit all the kids down in the field and give them a lecture. Now they're ranging from like 6 to probably 15 or something. And I started showing up before the day ended so that I could like, just watch them at the end and stuff. And I'm listening to these lectures. It's like a sermon he's giving them at the end of the day. And, he's telling them things like, you're not always going to win. You need to learn how to accept defeat. And he's telling them like some of these hard truths in addition to like the motivating things. And I noticed as the week went on of the camp that more parents started coming early to listen to him. And I was like, "Oh my god, this is a pep talk that I need too." And I was like, there's so much to learn about life from sports.
Yeah, it is. It's a vehicle. It's a vehicle for learning a lot about yourself and about your community. One of the things that I consistently teach my athletes is something that I had had to learn. And that is within you, there's usually two coaches. There is the coach that shows up for the kids at the camp who's generous and joyful and glad you're there and constantly reaffirming and works you hard, but joyfully. And then that other coach that shows up when in the quiet and says, "You're not good enough. Why are you doing this? Oh, no, no, erase that." Oh, whose criticism, well meaning though it is crushing. And so if I can give athletes one piece of advice is ask them what coach they're playing for. Make them recognize that they have a choice between these two personages that live within them. It's not that the critic will go away. They too want the best for you, but that you have a head coach that you can choose. And to choose that positive personality just as you would be that coach for somebody else. And that, among the lessons that I've been able to learn because I've had to try to teach them, that has been the most important for me, just to cultivate a spirit of joy in the process, whatever the process is, whether it's layups or paragraphs that we're working on or story structure that we're working on today.
I love that. And maybe sort of along that line, looking back on all your experience as an athlete and an artist, what lessons or insights do you think are most valuable for others to learn from those two very unique experiences?
Let's start from a place of joy and curiosity in either endeavor. Wonder if I can do that. Let me try to do that. Let me try again. And recognizing that failure is just part of the process and no reflection on who or what you are. That the more you fail, the more you will likely succeed in the end because you're willing to fail. And that's hard, especially when you get to a certain level of mastery. Now suddenly you think, well, you can't fail anymore. You can't miss that free throw. You can't write a shitty story because what will everybody think of you? Well, the honest answer is probably not as much as you're thinking about yourself. So if you can let go of that and embrace each day joy. I don't know if it's true or not, but I've heard that physiologically or psychologically, joy and fear, they can't occupy the same space. So choose joy. If you have a choice, choose joy to motivate you forward and recognize how much fear has motivated you in the past. The other thing I've learned from art is how prevalent imagination is. It's there even though you're not aware that you're using it. And often it slides in a downhill direction towards negativity. So if you can recognize that and utilize imagination in a positive way by choosing joy, by choosing that other coach, your growth is going to be more drastic and more joyful, and everyone around you will benefit from it.
All right, final question. What does the wisdom of the body mean to you?
It's a conversation constantly with the wisdom of the spirit. There is an interplay and an interaction. And if you can listen deeply enough, the spirit speaks through the body and to the body and interacts with the body. And odd as it may sound, as an athlete, that embodied wisdom happens for me in stillness, when I can come to a place of complete stillness and listen in. Then the physical aspects of my life will flow more gracefully with more wisdom than anything I could have tried to do by practice alone.
Mary, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed interviewing you, and I feel like you're tapped into a space that is very deep. And if people are listening right now and they want to learn about your work, your books, coaching, things like that, how can they get in touch with you?
I'm at Mary Volmer at St. Mary's, but probably my website at maryvolmer.com is the easiest place to get a hold of me. I'm happy to chat if you're an athlete, if you have young athletes in your life, if you're an artist. I love talking about story and about that process of becoming. And it would be my honor to help in any way I can, even if it's just to listen.
Thank you so much. The best kind of preacher without the preacher credentials. And Coming through in this unique way. I love it. You're channeling some good stuff here. Thanks so much, Mary.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
If you are embarking on a fertility journey and are ready to have your mind blown about what your body is really capable of and how it's impacted by the environment, then check out my book, The Ayurvedic Guide to Fertility. You can actually download the introduction to the book for free on my website at heathergrzych.com. That's Heather, Grzych.com. Read the intro for free and then buy the rest of this fertility enlightening book pretty much anywhere books are sold. You want a full human experience when you seek a healthcare provider, and you don't want 15 minutes with someone who can't even try to find out the root cause of things because they're so overwhelmed themselves. You have a body, a mind, a heart, and dare I say it, even emotions. You're not crazy. Everything does affect you, and it's possible to feel better if you have the support you need. Set up an appointment with me to heal naturally. Go to heathergrzych.com. That's Heather, Grzych.com. Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I really want to hear your feedback. To learn more about my work, visit heathergrzych.com. That's Heather, Grzych.com. And meet me here next time on The Wisdom of the Body.